For a slight change of pace, today I thought I'd do a short video about a caliber rather than a particular gun. You see, I've become enamored with 357 SIG over the past 18 months or so I've taken it upon myself to help spread the gospel to all corners of the globe. I think the round is underappreciated and somewhat misunderstood. For the uninitiated, I'll first go over the background briefly. 357 SIG is a pistol cartridge designed in the early 1990s as a joint venture between SIG, as in Sig Sauer, and Federal Ammunition. The stated goal was to give law enforcement a round with the proven power of 125 grain 357 Magnum coming out of a 4-inch barrel, but in a high-capacity compact semi-auto. It was essentially a way to equip officers with a 10 or 12 round 357 in a streamlined semi-automatic package. I don't want to wade into the tedious caliber debates, but I think it's pretty fair to say that a 357 Magnum is usually better at bringing someone down than a standard 9mm round, so the idea wasn't completely without merit. The SIG P229 was the gun used to introduce the caliber in 1994, and it was surprisingly successful and well received, at least compared to other attempts at new wonder calibers in the past, like 10mm for example. To describe the design, it's basically a 10mm brass case shortened and necked down to fire a 124 grain 9mm projectile. Since 40 Smith & Wesson, which came out around the same time, is also based on 10mm brass, there is some familiar connection there. Now I'll cover some of its benefits over more conventional calibers like 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, and 45 ACP in no particular order. Be aware that this is not a scientific or rigorous formal presentation. I'm just trying to make my case for why I think you might want to give 357 SIG a second look. First up is quote-unquote stopping power. I know, many of you are rolling your eyes because you know that stopping power is just a dumb cliche that newbies latch onto, but I'm more or less referring to its kinetic energy, which can translate roughly to just how much hurt you can put into your target, depending on bullet design and some other factors, of course. In its original 1500 feet per second, 124 grain configuration, you're at around 600 foot-pounds of energy with 357 SIG. By comparison, 9mm plus P, aka the hottest stuff you'll generally be shooting out of a 9mm pistol, is around 470 foot-pounds, a 22% decrease in energy. Standard 40 Smith & Wesson is in the vicinity of 450 foot-pounds, which is even less. These super high velocities and tremendous amounts of energy put into the projectile also mean that they almost always expand, which can sometimes be questionable with certain 9mm loads. Yes, you can crank out some unholy plus P+++ rounds that get up near the OG SIG cartridge, but these guns are designed for it and can shoot it all day without needing to have an ambulance on standby at the range. Number 2 is accuracy. Simply put, because of the high velocity, projectiles are like laser beams over distance. Granted, it's not a huge deal at 5 to 7 yards for combat shooting, but it's still a cool perk. Number 3 for me is reliability. The cartridge's bottleneck design means that in theory, failures to feed are virtually non-existent. The shape of the round itself guides it into the chamber naturally. This is a great thing in my opinion for the defensive scenarios the cartridge was intended for. I have seen some anecdotes of people having guns that have some feeding issues, surprisingly enough in Glocks sometimes, but I still think that in principle it should feed better than a non-bottlenecked caliber, and I know I for one have never had any sorts of feeding problems with my 357 SIGs. Benefit number 4 is barrier penetration. This one may not be super important for most of us, but if you need to shoot through glass or car doors, this is your round. It has enough weight and, more importantly, velocity to just zap through most light barriers without much deflection and still retain a lot of energy. This leads to the next pro, which is police approval. Many agencies have found the round to be highly effective, with some reporting nearly 100% one-shot stop performance. It's especially popular for highway patrol units because of its ability to pierce car doors and windows easily. Number 6, and keeping in mind these are in no real order, it's just fun to shoot. With hot rounds, a concussive blast is really satisfying for gat time. The fireballs can be cool in twilight and nighttime shooting too. And even with that blast, actual felt physical recoil, it really isn't that bad in my opinion, although I think the thump might trick you into thinking it's recoiling more than it is. Number 7 is pretty topical as of October 2016 as I'm making this video. It's virtually panic-proof. Because all the conformists out there only shoot 9mm, 40, and 45 out of their semi-autos, the prudent and handsome 357 SIG aficionado can stroll into Cabela's at practically any time and grab a few boxes of his favorite ammo without much difficulty. Number 8 is capacity. You're typically only losing a round or two to what you'd have in a 9mm in a similarly sized gun, but you have way more energy to dump into whomever presently needs killing. Finally, my 9th pro is the caliber conversion factor. If finding 357 SIG in your area can be tricky, almost every 357 SIG gun can be converted to 40 Smith & Wesson with a simple barrel swap. 40 Smith & Wesson is also relatively panic resistant now that everyone's moving on to 9mm, so with one gun you get 2 calibers to keep you blatting happily through ammo droughts. So as you can see, there are a lot of reasons to love the offbeat 357 SIG. To get most of these benefits though, you do need to shoot good ammo. My personal favorites are Underwood, Pervy Partisan, and Double Tap. If you're just shooting watered down generic stuff from Walmart, you're kind of missing the point of the round, but it's still a good round. Next, I'll cover some of the caliber's shortcomings. Despite all of these great attributes that I listed, no caliber is perfect at everything. Even 9mm and 5.56 have their compromises, so in the interest of impartial objectivity, I'll get into some other potential downsides of 357 SIG. First and foremost, obviously, is price. Even cheap ammo is about 40 cents a round. This adds up and can limit practice. Putting 1,000 rounds through your 357 SIG is going to cost twice as much to do the same in 9mm. Of course, this applies to a lot of calibers out there, so it's not like 357 SIG is the only one that will bleed your wallet, and it's also, of course, dependent on just, your financial situation and what your budget is. Another con is muzzle blast. It's great at the range and fine outdoors, a lot of fun outdoors even, but I'd hate to shoot one indoors or inside a car without ear protection. It can also make follow-up shots a little bit harder, but like I said, I think that the actual recoil isn't as bad as the blast makes you think it is. If you can just focus through the blast, it really isn't that bad. Plus, I guess even if you miss, the perp will probably be too deaf, blind, and bewildered to hurt you. By the way, this Steyr in particular handles hot 357s really, really well, practically like other guns do with 9mm. The third con is a little bit regional, and that's that it can be hard to find locally sometimes. I live in Texas, where the round has had popularity with various law enforcement agencies, so it's always available for me, but I know that elsewhere it's possible you'll have a harder time walking out of Walmart with a box of ammo. Also, good, hot ammunition is mostly only available from boutique brands like Underwood. Regular factory stuff can be a little bit underloaded. Number 4 is simply that there aren't a ton of interesting guns chambered in the round. There are a handful of cool ones like the USP Compact, Steyr, various SIGs, but nothing overly interesting or exotic ever came in 357 SIG. Of course, the reason for the round's existence is more geared towards defensive, practical carry situations, so you don't really need some sort of fancy hipster gun for that. Number 5 is that it's hard to reload. I don't reload myself, so I'm just relaying what I've read, but the bottleneck on the brass means it's not quite as brainless as with something like 45 or 9mm 38 Special. You're also more limited on the actual bullets you put into the brass because of the way the neck grabs onto them. In a similar vein, downside number 6 is that there isn't really a wide variety of bullets available. With 9mm, there are all sorts of weights and bullet designs out there, but with 357 SIG, you're kind of limited to just a few basics. They're good basics, but it's still limited. And finally, con number 7 is something I hear all the time: 9mm plus P is the same thing. No, it's not really, and also you're boring. Overall, in my opinion, most of these failings aren't really very serious and certainly don't make 357 SIG the clown caliber it's sometimes presented as. So, to summarize, if you like the idea of shooting something a bit out of the ordinary but still keeping an eye towards practical defense, I'd say you could do a lot worse than the Euro Exotique man stopper that is 357 SIG. It takes a bit more dedication and commitment to take advantage of, perhaps, but I personally think that in most ways it's actually objectively a better defensive round than 9mm. All that said, though, that doesn't mean I don't mostly carry a 9mm, and for those who are curious, it's usually a Gen 1 PPS or a USP Compact, but I do think the caliber is a bit too underrated these days and deserves a bit more popularity.